Good afternoon, Madam President. Good to see you this afternoon. I rise for some comments on the budget.
Please proceed, sir.
Proposed. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to stand here and talk about some of the ideas that we have for our budget, and kind of talk a little bit about some of the comments that I've heard made from my colleagues this afternoon. When you talk about adjustments, I believe we're talking about increases in taxes for the most part. When you talk about, and I heard my good colleague to my left mention over 15 times, bipartisan, bicameral. And those comments are true. They were true of the last 2 years, more so than they are true of this year. This is an effort to try to move this budget and sell this budget today. But in reality, we weren't involved in the crafting of this budget. Oh, sure, we were involved in committee hearings. We were involved in committee meetings. We talked about and listened to agencies as they came to talk to us as a committee. We listened, we asked questions, but all of that is a process that we are here and elected to do as part of the committee. And this year, a minority part of the committee. Last year, I too was proud to sit as co-chair of the Appropriations Committee, to sit across the table from my good colleague to my left, and work in a bipartisan, bicameral budget for the last 2 years. And we did, in fact, have a successful budget. We're looking at a $574 million, to use Senator Von Farah's number, surplus that we're looking for at the end of this month. And that's something that hasn't happened here in a long time. So while I appreciate the opportunities to hear about our bipartisanship and our bicameral work, it's important to note that that was in last session, not in this session. And it's important to note that a lot of the good ideas that were in that last budget last year were the result of sitting and talking to each other. That's what the people of the state of Connecticut want. That's what we wanted. That's what we offered this time. But that didn't occur in the crafting of this budget. So I'm just going to go over a few items, and I will yield to my good colleague, Senator Witkos, on the Finance Committee to share his thoughts. And then I imagine we'll have some questions directly for either of the senator co-chairs of the money committees. If you following along, I have the Office of Fiscal Analysis document that relates to this budget. Section 11 talks about, Madam President, recommended reductions from OPM in executive branch expenditures. Those reductions of $29 million in year one and $26.2 million in year two are listed as recommended reductions. There is no detail to that, but they're recommended reductions. As you move down the document, again, it talks about OPM making expenditure reductions, $163.2 million and $256 million to reduce pension and health care expenditures. We know from hearing and listening to the governor over the last number of months, and we know the intent of the governor is candidate Lamont talking about coming to the table with our great state employees and bringing them to agreement to achieve savings in these areas. And I know that as Governor Lamont, he tried to do that. Whether or not he's successful to achieve these dollars, I'm not sure. I haven't heard. But I know I did hear through the press that the COLAs were unachievable. The COLA compromises were unachievable, and those represent a little over 18 and a little over 20 million of these numbers that I just read off. If you go to line 15, section 15 of the OFA document, it talks about another expenditure reductions in the Special Transportation Fund of 18.3 million and 19.7 million. Again, with no detail. With regard to other items in this budget, the Office of Fiscal Analysis talks about increases in COG, which is 4.1 million, but it doesn't speak to any of the opportunities that may be required of COG and what they would need to do to get that money. So I'm a little concerned with that new policy. It goes on to speak about a new policy of the Secretary of State's office, $150,000 to support voter registration at higher education institutions. There's no details on how that is going to go. The new policy, which looks to appropriate $33.2 million in fiscal 20 to the Office of State Comptroller to fund the state employees' retirement system fringe recovery, and then the University of Connecticut Health Center. It's funded out of non-general fund resources, $8.2 million, and $20.3 million goes on to talk about the employees of the community colleges. With regard to UConn Health came before our committee and presented their budget, which was about $70 to $80 million short. And they presented that as a shortfall budget. In the previous bipartisan budget from last session, there was a requirement for UConn Health to proceed toward a merger or a sale or an opportunity to stop the bleeding that's occurred there financially over the last number of years. I'm not sure that that's addressed in this budget. Line 48 talks about a number of funding provided of $3.1 million in each of the next 2 years through youth service prevention grants, but it goes on to list a variety of different earmarks and looks like special interest opportunities to fund in this budget. Section 51 of the Office of Fiscal Analysis talks about reductions in executive branch expenditures associated with contract savings initiatives. $5 million in 20, $15 million in 21. And I know from sitting and listening of those appropriation committee meetings that this is the new contracting standard board's potential for savings. But this is a new program that for the first time is giving a start to the contracting standard boards. They've been around, but in a very small opportunity for a number of years. And to say that we're going to get $5 million and $15 million for $20 million in savings seems difficult to me to be able to achieve, Madam President. Continuing on, another new policy talks about services provided by a new ombudsman for the Department of Correction to provide services for inmates 18 years and younger. Could very well be a good program. And I'm wondering what those services are going to be, how the inmates are going to be housed and trained for reentry, treated, now that we close CJTS. Madam President, moving on to Section 71, distributions annually from the municipal gaming account to West Hartford and Windsor from the proposed tribal casino located in East Windsor. That seems to be outside of the Pequot Fund. There are certainly other opportunities that we are missing from those last two items that I think we could include, and you'll probably hear more about those later, Madam President. Sections 76 and 77 talk about local and district Department of Health departments being reduced 10% in each of the fiscal year of the biennium. That would seem to me to be a transfer of cost to municipalities who are already struggling. Section 78 talks about delaying the implementation and the use of bond premiums for future issuances. I think we're going to probably have some questions regarding the current policy, because in the bipartisan budget last year, this policy I thought was changed. I thought we were not using bond premiums to fund and use as a revenue for our budget. This seems to be back, and I'm wondering what the debt service impact would be with regard to that. Madam President, we heard talk of the Retirement Teachers Fund and bolstering that up with about $381 million out of the budget speaks to out of the reserve fund of 574. So we're whittling away a little more than half. We're going to backstop it by lottery proceeds. But I'm wondering how that's going to be done. Is there going to be a systematic savings account from the lottery that's going to be put aside in the event 3 years from now, 10 years from now, we need that backstop? Or is it just going to come out of operating expenditures at the time it's potentially needed? The various changes to the Teachers Retirement Fund methodology for the actuarial measurements. The savings indicated in this budget are $183.4 million and $189.4 million in 22, which the good senator mentioned, but didn't mention the cost of moving that out for an additional $15.6 billion over the next 15 years, 17 years. Didn't mention the fact that this has become a habit of shifting money out into the future. There was an opportunity to produce a biennial tax incident report in the bipartisan budget of last session. We're not doing that in this budget. We didn't do it and implement it in the last budget. It's too bad, because that would be a necessary tool to examine and evaluate our tax policy and the effectiveness of tax rates. I think, I'm sure like many people around the circle on both sides of the aisle, that we need to change our tax policy here in the state of Connecticut. We need to adjust it. And having that report would go a long way to helping us establish that. Another new policy in this budget establishes a Connecticut Hydrogen and Electric Automobile Purchase Rebate Board, which is designed to provide rebates to purchasers of certain motor vehicles. I imagine those would be electric vehicles. Perhaps they're hydrogen. Because my understanding is that the federal rebate program runs out at the end of this year. And to do that, another fee is added of $5 on various motor vehicle registration fees, which will raise $8 million, $3 million of which will go to fund the program. $5 million will go, according to this document, to the general fund. We seem to be using that vehicle, I guess, as a way to fund. Madam President, I heard the good senator talk about the change in the Passport to Parks sweeps and moving those over to operating expenses of DEEP, and I'm grateful to hear that. We did the Passport to Parks together in a bipartisan way last session, because Governor Malloy made the change in his management of our parks. He called it passive management, which really meant they weren't going to staff the place. And we came together in a bipartisan way last session to come up with a fix for that, because we knew it wasn't safe for our kids to walk the parks without adequate supervision, and we knew that we needed to fund the restoration and the creation of our new parks so that they would remain in the great shape that they need to be. Because the people in the state of Connecticut, through this Passport to Parks program, get an opportunity to go in by having a Connecticut registration and by paying $10 on their registration. They get to park at the parks for free. And that's a great program. That's a win-win program we're able to do in a bipartisan manner last session. Madam President, we talked about a number of things so far. Section 144 refers to a state or elected official being able to not accept its compensation or benefit. And I know that that refers to a couple of people in this new administration who have foregone their salary, which I think is noble, and it's a good thing if that's what they want to do. But as a former first selectman, having faced something like this before, I'm aware that it creates a hole in future budgets, because not everybody elected in that position is going to have that opportunity. So I just caution moving forward on something like that, while remaining appreciative to those generous people who have decided to do that. We have some questions with regard to establishing the Partnership for Connecticut program. The Connecticut program was the new contributions by the Dalio family. It's a 5-year commitment, $100 million matched by $100 million. We have some questions about how those are distributed. Is the new policy going to report to the money committees with regard to how that money was spent, how it was distributed, the effectiveness of the program, and to whom, and any of the results? Another new policy is establishing the Municipal Redevelopment Authority. as a quasi-public agency to do bonds. And I have concerns. Some years ago there was talk about the transit-oriented development and the talk of eminent domain from some communities being used as a way to increase train and transit opportunities in towns, which did not make the cut, but I'm concerned that this might be an opportunity to revisit a policy, a poor policy like that. Section 232 and 235 talk about SB 1. SB 1 is a priority for many people here with regard to the paid family and medical leave program. I'm wondering, in the way this is put, whether this allows that funding to be outside of the spending cap. The $5.1 million that was in the budget for the labor agencies, installation or initiation of that program, there's no talk of the capital costs necessary to implement that program, nor have we heard or talked about, I believe, any bond bill that I didn't see associated with this budget, so it's hard to tell what those capital costs are. Madam President, in sections 291 and 292, it talks about freezing the rates for TANF and SAGA, and I listened intently to the good senator to my left talk about the need for temporary programs there, but we were able to provide in section 48 $6 million for specific little programs, but we're freezing the money, any increases for these programs. Section 305 is a new policy, provides a prohibition of covenants not to compete. And I think it's earmarked for a specific child care program, but that would have huge fiscal impacts for businesses around the state if they can't protect their proprietary rights. That policy doesn't establish whether it's just for the one program or whether it's for every business. So, Madam President, we have some concerns. You're going to hear some other concerns from our side of the aisle. We were hopeful at the beginning of this session. We're hopeful with the new administration. I was glad that both the governor and the lieutenant governor chose New London to come out. It's one of the first stops that they had, and we had a wonderful bipartisan conversation, and we talked about the needs of moving things in southeastern Connecticut forward. And I would certainly agree with Senator Fonfara that my good colleague to my left does in fact love eastern and southeastern Connecticut. But while those ideas were offered to come and sit, they seldom were taken advantage of. So, Madam President, in closing, I would just like to say that small business is the job creator of this country. It always has been, and as a job creator in the country and here in the great state of Connecticut. Job creators create. That's what they do. They create jobs, jobs that pay taxes. They invest in capital infrastructure, infrastructure that pays property taxes. They create cash flows through payrolls and other opportunities that stimulate and grow the economy, funding and paying sales and use taxes. My question, Madam President, is what have we done this session to help those job creators? What have we done? How have we set the table of prosperity for job creators? How are we making Connecticut more business friendly? People around this circle and people in committees that I serve on hear me talk about prime costs. As a business owner and a job creator, prime costs is a tool that I use to manage my business. Prime costs are made up of two only costs: product costs and labor costs. And they're a benchmark that I use to measure the effectiveness and the profitability of my business moving forward. Because it's important for me to manage our business and manage the profitability, because it's in that profitability that we're able to create jobs, build capital infrastructure, help stimulate the economy, and move our economy forward. And I'm seeing those prime costs. I'm concerned from some of the things that we've done this session and some of the things that are in this budget. We've had a minimum wage increase, which we've talked about as being an entry-level wage, and it's increased, and there's many arguments whether that's a good thing. That is going to be a pressure on small business, especially the smallest of small business. And other businesses are going to feel the compression in that minimum wage, which means if you raise somebody to 12, then the people at 12 go to 14, and the people at 14 have to go to 16, et cetera, and it goes up. So that will put pressure on my prime cost, or on businesses' prime costs. Paid family and medical leave. While it's a noble idea, the unemployment exemption, which was presented as part of the budget, as part of the bill, the unemployment exemption is this: it says that if you're hiring a temporary worker for the 12 weeks that your employee is off on paid medical family leave qualifying event, they would not be eligible to collect unemployment after those 12 weeks. That was in the bill that we listened to. In this budget, that exemption seems to be stricken. And so that would put pressure on my labor costs, because the more people that collect unemployment, the higher the modification rate is on your business, and the higher your percentage of unemployment compensation begins as a result of that. Training costs and administrative costs go with that program that are unrecognized. The expansion of the dozen or so contracts that we've increased our personal services line by $92 million, increasing our budget, is going to drive up our state's personal service costs, and that's going to end up as a trickle-down effect on small business here on Main Street in Connecticut. Job security. Listen, as an employer and as a job creator, I can say firsthand that employees and frontline employees are our greatest asset. And reasonable wage increases are reasonable. The second part of prime costs is our product pressures. New taxes. I happen to work in the hospitality industry. My business is there, and we have a new tax. We're not like all the other taxes, I guess, in the state of Connecticut, all the other businesses that are going to get taxed at 6.35%. We have the opportunity for, I don't know why, just as a restaurant or a food preparer, to be taxed at 7.35%. I don't know why we were chosen, but that's going to certainly put pressure as people begin to think about the increased costs to come in to any hospitality industry, any food preparation industry, any place where they can get a drink out of a soda machine or a candy bar or any type of other bar. And that 1% as part of the conversation, Madam President, was supposed to go to help fund cities and towns. That was the conversation. And I don't see that in this budget. That 1% seems to go to the general fund. So I'm a little concerned about that. We have many talks of potential tolls. We're up and down on that. Everybody's tired of talking about tolls. I don't know if we'll see tolls or we won't see tolls. But if we do, any product that is moved through this state on a truck is going to cost more to get delivered, because those costs are going to get passed along to the people that use those products. And that will further drive up the product portion of my and other businesses' small prime costs. Tax expansions. While the rates, as been pointed out, have not been raised, the sales tax and other taxes have been expanded to include many, many more opportunities that are going to cost the people in the state of Connecticut more money out of their pocket. So, Madam President, I submit that these policy changes, combined with really the limited positive impact on small business that's happened here at this circle as we enter the last 2 days of session, and actually the General Assembly, is going to make it more difficult for the people that operate small businesses, for the families that populate the state of Connecticut and support small businesses, to have money in their pocket, while other programs will see increases. And I have no doubt that the good senator to my left worked very hard. I have known Senator Austin for many, many years. We worked together as first selectman on the Council of Governments in southeastern Connecticut. Her work ethic is legendary. I just disagree with some of the policies that we're putting out here today. Now, there are positive signs, and I think they're worthy of recognition. The tourism support that we worked last session in a bipartisan way. The passport to parks, we worked in a bipartisan opportunity in last session. Support for the deaf, the blind, the ECS policy that we put together in a bipartisan way last session. The Social Security exemption and pension reduction over time that we put together in a bipartisan way last session. Those are good things to continue. But in closing, Madam President, I ask, how much better would this budget have been if we were able to be at the table for all of the items in this budget? How much better would this budget have been for the people in the state of Connecticut if we had the opportunity to sit across the table as we did last session and debate these policy changes and understand our differing perspectives? As I said, I was proud to serve last session as a co-chair of the Appropriations Committee, and I'm proud to serve in this circle, and I'm proud to serve as ranking member. But once those committee meetings were over, we didn't have a screening meeting. We didn't have a meeting where we sat down and talked about budgets. We didn't have a meeting where we sat down and went over these numbers or new policies that pepper this budget. We had occasional conversations about occasional issues. And again, I don't disrespect the work that's done by all of the people involved here. But I think that this final document that we have in front of us, that uses up a lot of the $560 million expected surplus by the end of this month from the bipartisan budget we did last session, is going to create more challenges for us. So, Madam President, I'm unable to support this budget today because that document, I believe, swallows up a lot of the good things that have happened, and it includes tax increases of nearly $900 million in each of the next 2 years. So I want to thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to stand and discuss this as always, and I'd like to yield to my good friend and Senator and Ranking Member on the Finance Committee, Senator Witkos.
Thank you, Senator Formica. Good afternoon, Senator Witkos.